Greg Carlwood, you are like a brother from another mother. Keep up the great work. Podcast is amazing. One of the best out there. Thanks again, man.
In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats.
How's it going, Higher Side Chatters? Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke. I'm Greg Carlwood, just getting ready for the wild week ahead of Comic-Con here in sunny Sandy. And today on the show is a serious plethora of paranormal goodness. Chad Lewis joins me to talk about all the weirdness in his work that he's researched and sought out over the course of his career. UFOs, crop circles, spook lights, orbs, curses, tulpas, Slender Man, haunted places, cryptids, conjuring, and consciousness. It's all here, baby. And today we have another Money Bomb round ending, and we had two winners again, Brittany and Julie, two lovely ladies I'm lucky to have listening in. We're going to talk to Brittany for just a minute today and Julie on the next one. And we're also less than 10 days away from the launch of THC Plus, the new extended show for subscribers who are willing to support the show to the tune of about $5 a month. I'm not trying to gouge you guys. I just really need some money coming in. I'm all in on this ride, and I hope you're buying a ticket. Signups have been pretty low, and I'm getting worried, but I know a lot of you are just waiting until the first. If you like the show, sign up over at the HigherSideChatsPlus.com for only $5. It's less than a trip through the drive-thru. It's a box of cereal. It's a beer. $5 is exactly what I tip my dispensary bud tender, and they don't do shit. So I don't think it's a lot to ask. I have recorded the first two Plus shows already, and I gotta say, they are pretty damn good. But enough of the support talk. Let's get weird. Here's another little ditty that was sent in as a potential theme song. We're going to talk to Money Bomb winner Brittany, and then we're going to perform the ritual of all rituals with Chad Lewis on the other side.
Drink a little drink, my friend, smoke a little smoke, 'cause it looks like Mr. Carlwood is starting up the show. We're diving down the rabbit holes and trying to relax. I hope you're ready for the Higher Side Chats.
Hey, Brittany, it's Greg from the Higher Side Chats. How are ya?
I'm doing good.
Hey, I know you're busy. I'll make this quick, but thanks a lot for listening and for donating, and congrats on winning the Money Bomb.
Hell yeah. Life is pretty cool sometimes.
Yeah. So tell the people a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do?
I'm from LA, and I'm an 8 to 5er. Sounds kind of boring, but, it's not too bad.
We've all been there. Right on. What are some of your favorite topics or guests we have on THC? I always like to ask the Money Bomb winners that.
All right. Well, I really liked Stuart Swardlow. He was cool. I love the Hollow Earth stuff. It's awesome. I really like Dan Fogler. That was cool, too. And the flying humanoids. I love anything cryptozoology.
Yeah, cryptozoology is definitely an area I like a lot. It's a guilty pleasure. I don't think the audience likes it quite as much all the time, but there is some of that in the new one. So,
and we'll keep it coming.
Awesome. Are there any topics that I have yet to talk about that you think are important that you'd like to hear about?
Well, here's one that I always look around for, but I never really get too much material on, is the McMartin preschool case. It fascinates me. I'm from the South Bay. I'm the age of, I was a kid when it happened, and it was like the most expensive case in U.S. history. But there's not really a lot to be said out there about it, and I'm totally curious about it.
Yeah, I know the cliff notes to the story, but you're right. I don't know a whole lot of details. So I don't know. Maybe I'll look around for a book or an author, somebody who's really covered it in depth. But yeah, that's a pretty explosive case. It should be talked about.
Yeah, do that for me.
For sure, I will. So since the money bomb is made up of the people's money, we went over 500, so I always like to split it at that point. And so you're going to get 385. We're going to work that out however we do it. And
Woohoo!
do you have any plans for the people's money at all?
Well, I do have my eyes on a conspiracy. I really like the professional sheep.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get that. And then I am going to buy a gift for my husband. He's a musician, but he kind of put that aside to get a career in film. So I always like to get him stuff to keep that side of him alive. So I'm going to get him a guitar pedal.
Oh, that's awesome. That is an incredibly important part of a partnership. And not enough people really support their partner's dreams and ambitions. So that's awesome.
Oh, thank you. And, I'll probably have some left over. That's going to go to me. I've recently been spending some money on a health journey, eating clean and doing all this gnarly stuff, and it's getting kind of expensive. So, life's looking up for me, and it was really cool to find out I won the money bomb. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're going to put it to good use, so I'm happy. I hope the people are happy. I'm glad you're happy. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I'll let you get back to it.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Enjoy the day.
I will.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mr. Carlwood comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. THC, 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 THC. Speaking words of wisdom, THC.
All right, people, today is going to be the show of shows, haunted places, lake monsters, UFOs, and the whole grab bag of paranormal weirdness. Because if you want to understand and explore these oddities beneath the humdrum reality, you really got little choice but to explore them yourself. Millions of people see, hear, and find themselves smack dab in the middle of life-changing experiences with things they can't explain and are left with few options. In a world where the masses are well-trained to scoff at the mysterious and just get back to work. Lucky for these marginalized strangeness experiencers, they have today's guest to talk to, and today's guest has THC. His name is Chad Lewis, and he's been researching, lecturing, and investigating tales of the paranormal and downright bizarre for over 20 years all around this crazy planet. He's also written several books about these stories and investigations, including The Most Gruesome Hauntings in the Midwest, Pepie, the Lake Monster of the Mississippi, and over half a dozen state guides to strangeness and haunted sites. I know I'm ready to get weird. Chad, my man, how the hell are you?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for being here. I mean, this is going to be a good time, man. I've heard you talk about a pretty wide range of paranormal stuff, and the list of your investigations that you have on your website is even longer. So with subject matter this wide-reaching, I'm curious, what drew you into this stuff in the first place, man? Was there a particular investigation you did where you find yourself going from enthusiast to more of a professional?
Yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin, which has 3 UFO capitals of the world, 3 different cities, and I grew up near one of those called Elmwood. And during high school, I had heard about people seeing and in some cases encountering these UFOs. So I went there to investigate, and I was just about to study psychology at the university. And I really was interested in why people believe in the strange and unusual when other people do not. So I started researching that through my undergraduate, and I found a lot of different findings that I would present at research symposiums, really boring statistical stuff. You're glad you weren't there. But after the program, people would come up and say, I know this isn't really what you're doing, but I think my home's haunted, or I saw something I can't explain in the sky. Could you help me investigate? So it really just blossomed from there.
Wow, pretty interesting thread to follow. And I mean, man, out of all the great stuff you've done, I do think UFO research is probably what's most interesting to me. Maybe we could talk about a couple of those investigations further. I've seen you've done a decent amount of research into the big ones, the ones that everyone would know. I mean, Roswell and Area 51. Did you find anything outside of the typical storyline for these topics, or did you get any confirmation that the stories are true?
Yeah, that's the problem when you investigate, Roswell, Area 51, these things that have been really beaten to death that I don't know if there is anything more to come out from these stories. And yes, it's fun to go there and see where these events were alleged to have taken place, and interview people around the area about certain things that may still be going on. But in terms of turning up something new, I don't know if it's possible on those cases, which it was one of the reasons I love doing these smaller cases that many people may not have heard of, because there is often that possibility of something new and strange popping up.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, I mean, those stories alone, if they're true, the implications are so huge and so massive that I think that's why they're so iconic. And I think people are always looking for confirmation. But sadly, the further we get away from the actual event, I mean, most of that drifts away over time.
And I think today a lot of people are confused of what to believe about Roswell and others, because so much has come out on so many different theories, not just from the government, who changes their explanation every couple years, but researchers as well, that are every year a new book with a new theory seems to come out. And as fascinating as it is, I think sometimes all it does is scramble for the people that are not diehard enthusiasts. The general public, they don't know what to think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And what about this other one you have listed? I hadn't heard of before, the Aztec crash site in New Mexico. That sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones too, and many people have investigated that one, including Stanton Friedman. Of obviously, many people know him for the Roswell case, but it's another claim that another saucer crashed in the desert near Aztec, New Mexico. And it was thought to be very similar to the Roswell crash, but back in 48. And they even have out in the middle of a desert a little plaque where this craft was said to have crashed. And for many years, the town had a UFO festival where they celebrated the town's history. They had a UFO gift shop. But some of that's kind of gone by the wayside now, as it's gotten further from the time period. But yeah, it was said to be a strange crash, much like Roswell.
Interesting. And I mean, just the term Aztec crash site got me thinking. I mean, do you find in all these things that you investigate, do you think that Native American cultures kind of have a more general acceptance of all these forms of weirdness, UFOs, spirits, haunted places, cryptozoology? I mean, they seem to be normalizing these things in their culture a little bit, at least more than we do, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Yes. Many cultures in the native tribes talk about everything you just listed, from mysterious things in the sky to mysterious things in the woods. And they believe it as part of their culture. And what I found with my dealings with many native tribes is that many of them on some of these topics do not want to talk about it. And not because they're being rude or unfriendly. It's because for many of them, they believe in it so much that the mere thought of talking about it turns these things against you, especially when it comes to things like the Wendigo or other beasts, the Sasquatch and type, that if you talk about these things, they will pick up on it and come after you. So it's best left to leave these things alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, every time I talk to a cryptozoology researcher, we get into the idea of like how many people are really out there with stories they won't even talk about because it just sounds too crazy. I'm sure that the experiences are far more vast than even the researchers are ever really going to get to know.
And that's the thing with UFO research as well, that we know the majority of people who have something bizarre happen to them, whether it's a sighting or an alleged abduction or experience, one, they don't know who to report it to, or they don't think anyone would believe them, or they try to rationalize it away, that they simply don't make that report. So we can take the amount of reports we have, and I think that's only a fraction of what's really happening.
Yeah, I agree, man. And you've also done some looking into crop circles. Any interesting insight from those investigations?
Yes, I've researched about 12 crop circles. Starting in 1994 was my first, and that was an interesting one because the newspapers that touted this thing said that vandals had smashed down this cornfield. And I had spoken with the farmer and asked him if he noticed anything weird out of the ordinary before he found these formations in his crop. And he said nothing. You know, his livestock was fine, no lights, no people, nothing. So when I asked him why he told the newspaper that vandals did it, he told me, well, what else could have done it? So I think that illustrates just what we're dealing with some of these formations, that farmers and ranchers aren't necessarily concerned with what's doing it. They just want it to stop because for them, it's a loss of not only their crop, but possibly next year's crop as well that's damaged in future crops. So I think that's one of the interesting things. But some of the cases I've investigated, some have left me baffled as to I have no idea what caused it. Some I think maybe it was a hoax. Others, I believe that it was wind created. I had a farmer near Madison, Wisconsin, who told me he was watching the wind move his field like waves in the ocean. And he had the radio on, listening to the weather report that talked about a big storm coming in. And as he looked over his field, within 7 seconds, it just went down in what we would consider a formation, you know, circles with attachments to them. If you drove by, you'd think that's a crop circle, but he was adamant that the wind or the weather had created it.
Now that's interesting. I haven't heard that one before. I mean, there's obviously a lot of shows out there and people who make the case that they've shown plenty of times that people can do this in a night, but some of the stranger cases, it seems like the stalks have been dried out or they're affected in some way other than just being broken down with a board, which is the way they've shown people doing it before. Have you ever found weirdness like that in any of these circles that you've investigated?
What I find interesting is that most people in the general public will think that crop formations are made by Doug and Dave, the two old British men, who, of course, if they've been making them, they've been making them since the 1600s in nearly every country on Earth. So they're experienced travelers. But yes, we found really a lot of strange things. When we've taken soil samples and sent them into Nancy Talbot of BLT Research there, found that in the control samples, the samples that were not affected, the non-down, the stuff that's regular, was much different than the soil inside the affected formation. You know, it's either devoid of water or there's metal filings in there or it's been changed due to some high heat or radiation. The actual node of these plants has been blown out, as it's called, by high heat or some source of radiation. So there's a lot of differences that there should not be. Whether it's man-made or something else, I don't know. But if you're taking samples nearby one another, you would think to get roughly the same type of results. But that's not the case with formations.
Yeah, some of them definitely seem real. And to really dive into crop circles, man, you kind of have to get into some deep level material, because to the average person, it makes no sense why an intelligent race of beings would want to make these patterns. But if you get into the Egyptian mystery schools and secret societies and Gnosticism, you start finding out that a lot of these crop circle symbols seem to jive with the shapes and symbols of what they call sacred geometry or the hidden sciences to these secret orders. So then you start to wonder if they're trying to hint at some lost natural science or energy systems, and it starts to make a little more sense as a motivation of why they would do that.
I know a lot of people have actually mapped out all these formations, made 3D renderings of them, and have compared them to signs and symbols throughout the history of the world. And that's a fascinating research area for me, looking into that. I love it. And I love when crop circles and crop formations have a little something different with it. I was researching one crop formation that appeared in a farmer's backyard in his field. And what he didn't know is a few days earlier, I was speaking to a neighbor a few miles down the road who reported seeing a mysterious ball of light hovering in the sky about 11:30 at night as he took his trash out. And as he watched this ball of light move in the direction of where the formation would appear, he said it was being followed by some helicopter. He thought it was military, but he couldn't make out any markings on it. So here we have a ball of light being either followed, accompanied, or chased by this helicopter, and then a formation appears in this very same area in the same time frame. So those are the stories I love that have a little extra weirdness to them.
Yeah, man. I mean, when you get into this field for as long as you've been in it, it takes a little something extra to really rile you up. I'm getting in that same place myself, but there is a really compelling video. It's hard to really look at videos these days and trust them, but I've seen one of orbs kind of dancing around a field, and then below them, the crop circle kind of forms, and it's like completely bewildering and doesn't make a lot of logical sense. But I mean, I can't see any elements of Photoshop in it. It looks pretty interesting, and a lot of people see these balls of light. They're weird. They're hard to rationalize because it's not a nuts and bolts craft, and it's not a biological looking person. So it's like, what the hell is it?
Yeah, and some of the witnesses I've spoken with who have seen similar things say that these lights or whatever they are seem to dart around as though they're intelligent controlled, that they have some intelligence to them. And I was researching a formation in Minnesota where the farmer told me the night before he noticed that all of his cattle were acting really strange all night. He could hear them, and he would pop his head out periodically just to check on them, but they were just riled up by something. And then, of course, the next day is when he discovered the formation in his backyard.
Weird, man. And on the subject of these orbs, and when you consider these in the field of more the paranormal or haunted things or ghosts, a lot of people see these same things. They just call them spook lights. And this was kind of new to me before I looked into your research. And I actually grew up in Missouri, and I heard about this thing here and there. But if you do a Google image search, you can kind of see that a lot of people have gotten pictures of this, and it all seems to be happening at the same spot where they have a really high success rate of seeing it. I mean, have you ever been to the one in Missouri there? Can you tell me what's going on with that?
Yeah, many people call it the Joplin spook light or the Hornet spook light outside of the small town there. And it's a series of, hills going into the railroad tracks where you can see off in a distance this ball of light that seems to rise up on its own and hover about, but those who get close to it can see it. People will be on walkie-talkie and radio, and they'll say you're right in front of it, and yet the person closer can't find it. And what I found is researching these is that there are several locations around the U.S. There's another one up in my neck of the woods in the Paulding Light of Michigan, it's called, where if you were dumped there, you wouldn't know if you were in Joplin or Paulding because it's the same thing. Railroad lines with a big hill going down, and it's almost identical to the Paulding light and the spook light. And the stories are the same, these balls of light. But witnesses claim that they've actually been chased by these balls of light, again, as though they're under some type of intelligent control.
Yeah, man, super strange. I mean, the language used in calling it a spook light seems to imply either something ghost-related or the Midwest is just super racist, or both, but orbs of light seem to be happening all over the place. It's almost like a whole nother section of research, but I would be more inclined to think it had something to do with ET contact or maybe a biological intelligent entity that is multidimensional or something that is natural to the Earth that just is on a different wavelength than we are. It's weird.
And a lot of these stories predate automobiles, so they go back generations. So I think it seems fitting that back at that time, they would account it as a haunting, a ghost light. And a lot of the original stories are of railroad men who lost their lives, and that's why they're carrying the lantern out there. You know, your typical ghost or haunted stories, because at the time, that's the only information they had to explain it. Whereas nowadays, maybe more people are looking at it as you mentioned, some type of other light rather than just it being a haunted story.
Yeah. And I mean, you have looked into a lot of haunted places, which I've never really covered in almost 3 years of doing this show, because when I see the TV shows, there just seems to be a lot of fraud. And because you're dealing with the dead, a lot of people get into religion, which I've had enough of for one lifetime, honestly. But I mean, are there any haunted locations that stick out to you as particularly creepy and interesting?
Yeah, many that are creepy and interesting, but you're right that I've investigated thousands of these places around the world that have a haunted story to them. And oftentimes you start hearing the same type of thing happening over and over and over. And whether that's just part of the actual phenomenon or it's that people have been conditioned from all the TV shows that are on there that every noise now has to be a residual haunting or
Yeah.
every single thing that happens has to have a spirit with it. And it's amazing that when I do lectures how many people have a haunted story with them. Now, I love haunted stories. I love watching the progression of these stories as they move throughout the years. That there are many of these stories that if you talk to seniors in their 70s and 80s, they remember the story from their teenage years, and it may be one version, and then you talk to teenagers currently, and they have a completely different story of the same case. So it's just moved and progressed over the years.
It's like a weird game of telephone, the stories definitely morph. But, if I was somewhat skeptical of ghosts and haunted places, and I wanted to get some personal validation, is there a certain location in modern times that you would send me to?
Yeah, I would think I would personally go maybe stay away, just like some of the UFO stuff. Maybe stay away from the big ones. You can go to Alcatraz. You can go to the Villisca Axe Murder House of Iowa and some of these really well-known hauntings. But if you want to just find something right in your backyard, I recommend you go out into some of these rural places where you're not going to be bothered by other people visiting. You're not going to be bothered by, traffic and all these disturbances, where you can just go to these places and have something happen. Now, the problem with the hauntings is there's no really rhyme or reason to them. Some of them, yes, will say you have to be there on a certain time at a certain night. But many of them are just sporadic. We have no rhyme or reason as to when or why people have experiences. So you can go to an alleged haunted place 10 times in a row and nothing will happen, yet somebody just happens by there not even knowing it's haunted and they have an experience. But my advice is always hit the back roads, get out to the places that are hard to get to and nobody's there. And if you go in thinking something might happen, you have a much greater chance of something happening. That was one of the things I found working on my master's thesis, looking at beliefs in the paranormal, that when people went to these places expecting that something was going to happen, it was statistically speaking much more likely that something would happen to them. Now, whether it really happened or they just imagined it, that's a whole different question.
Well, it is a really interesting one because that gets into the idea of manifesting reality, the power of consciousness. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of occult magicians on some of these other shows, members of the OTO and followers of Crowley, and a lot of these guys, that's kind of their philosophy, is that you can manifest reality in some way. It's more malleable than we think. We're not victims of a universe that exists and we're just part of it. We're co-creators of it. And that jives with that. I wonder if there's not something there that people are bringing forth things out of their deeper recesses of their consciousness that they don't realize they're doing. I wonder what the relationship is there.
That's a great point, and I think you're right on there that a lot of people that do go there, maybe they're opening themselves up or creating it. A lot of the intuitives or psychics I sometimes bring with me will report that you have to open yourself up or create this atmosphere for these things to change, and that maybe it's that positive intent follows the energy of it, or energy follows intent of it. And I think a lot of people that when they have to open it up, you start looking into tulpas and other things that maybe these things have been created by our own belief systems.
Tulpas, I'm not familiar with that. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah, tulpas, obviously they have a long history, and what it is many researchers are now believing many cryptids might be tulpas, and that is the belief that you can actually create these things out of thin air, that if there's enough belief and enough storytelling and enough conjuring, if you will, of these things, you actually manifest them and create them. And there were many experiments years ago during seances where people seemed to be able to create actual spirits, that they gave them a backstory and they gave them everything that they needed, and these things took on a life of their own. And that many researchers believe that, you know, Bigfoot or other creatures may not actually be flesh and blood, but they may be something that over generations have been created by our conscious belief in them.
That is really interesting. I just recently had a guest in the magic realm, Phil Farber. He brought up a concept. He talks about mimetic entities, which seems very similar to Tulpas, and it seems to be the case. I mean, one big example is the work of H.P. Lovecraft, you know, a legendary, famous writer of strange fiction, horror fiction, and his lore is so rich and fans are so into it that there are magical sects that are trying to invoke or conjure the beings of H.P. Lovecraft and his material. And if there's if there's enough of a base there, if there's enough of a consensus on what this archetype or idea represents, and enough people concentrate on it, it seems to have, in some extreme cases, real third-dimensional reality effects. I have a hard time finding a science that can answer why that happens.
And I think one of the most recent examples we have of this is that of the Slender Man. That, of course,
yes,
you know, it was created online, but then spread, and all of a sudden people actually started seeing it out in their daily lives. And just recently in my home state here in Wisconsin, we had two girls try to murder their friend, 12-year-olds tried to murder their friend, stabbed her multiple times and left her for dead as a tribute to Slender Man, that they were actually going to go visit him. And one of them said that Slender Man had been communicating telepathically with her. So I think this is a great case of one of those where something starts out as just almost a lark online, and it creates its life of its own, and really people believe it's out there right now.
You know, I guess skeptics would say that either the girl's crazy or has some need for self-importance or attention, but it's just kind of depends on the terms you use, because you could also call that mild possession. You know, who knows where the real motivation to kill came from? That's pretty trippy stuff.
It is, and I think when it's done outside of, you brought up religion earlier, when it's done outside of religion, it's seemed as a mental illness, that if this person's communicating with Slender Man, obviously she has some mental issues going on. But yet when you get a calling from God, or that, you know, you find that God's communicating with you, that's quite different in the mass media anyway.
Right, and it's really easy for people who've never had this type of experience to point to someone and just label them as crazy, but that might be easy to say if an entity has never targeted your consciousness, you know?
Yeah, thankfully. I mean, knock on wood, but these girls were, you know, adamant that this thing was alive and that it was controlling them, and they had to do this. And that's something we haven't seen in a while, especially with something that really has only been around since, you know, 2009, and it's gaining such notoriety so quick that 10 years from now, people may be seeing the Slender Man everywhere, or it might evaporate overnight.
Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt that people have seen some weird stuff and had some super strange experiences in this area, in the area of hauntings and ghosts and entities like that. But one of the big issues I have with ghost hunters as compared to, say, like UFO hunters or cryptid hunters is the EMF meters they use, because they're supposed to detect changes in electromagnetic fields or electrically charged objects. But if you look into the electric universe model or the secret sciences of the elite or the suppressed work of Nikola Tesla, I'm not sure that we know enough about electric currents or electromagnetism in our world in general to use these types of devices reliably. You know what I mean?
I wish I would have gotten into the EMF business aspect of it years ago, because you're exactly right. You turn on any television show or look at any of these thousands of ghost hunting groups that pop up, they all run around with an EMF meter that any spike is a evidence of a ghost. And I don't know where these things came from. I think many people started out using these things to try to explain rational or logical explanations. And then somehow it got turned into, if you have an electrical disturbance, it's a ghost. And I don't know where that came from. Why isn't it a leprechaun or a unicorn? We have no proof that it's a ghost, yet when people get these spikes on their EMF meters or their K2 meters or their Frank's box, all these things all of a sudden point to ghosts when there's really no evidence whatsoever for it.
What is your take on ghosts, man? I mean, have you seen? I'm sure you've seen enough in your research to think there's something going on there, but do you think it's some type of interaction with our reality from people who have died, or is it something else?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess the simple answer is I don't know. After 20-some years of doing this, I'm left with more questions than answers. I really believe that after talking with thousands of witnesses, that most of them are normal, logical, rational, intelligent people who just had something bizarre happen to them that they can't explain. Yet, are they really seeing someone that's come back from the dead, or are they seeing some type of environmental recording of an event that's already happened and it just keeps replaying over and over and over on a DVD type loop? I don't know. Or are they hallucinating and seeing maybe into different dimensions? And I still don't have a definitive answer. Every time I think I get a theory to explain some of these things, I get a new case that puts me right back to square one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really, I don't rule anything out, and I'm not really attached to any particular worldview, but I vibe more with concepts of reincarnation and the idea that our bodies are just vessels that allow the universal consciousness to look at itself. And within that framework, I've had a hard time explaining ghosts to myself, or more so than someone with a Catholic view might. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, think that ghosts are deceased loved ones who have come back or are in a place where they can communicate. Whereas other cultures, and even here in the States, other people see them as demons or, other entities that are not human. And although most people think of them as someone who has once lived on Earth and is now coming back, that's not the universal belief in them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would side more with those people too, that it's something other than a person that's died. But I guess that's just kind of what Hollywood puts out there. That's what the mainstream ghost hunter shows tend to be about. So yeah, it seems like the conventional view, but I mean, nothing about these things has really a conventional view. Everybody's kind of figuring it out on their own. But, we kind of mentioned the concepts of imposing your will on the universe and occult magic earlier, which I really like. And it sort of touches on the idea of curses and cursed places, which you've done some looking into too. Do you know any compelling stories of curses that seem to hold up to you?
Well, a lot of them are friends of friends stories that I've researched hundreds of these dares around the U.S. and the world, and dares are usually things you have to do at these usually haunted places that if you do them, bad luck, misfortune, mishap, even death will follow you. And it's always a friend of a friend that someone will contact me and say that they sat in the cursed chair in a cemetery and that, their friend was involved in a car accident on the way home. So then you try to talk to that friend, and it turns out that was a coworker of those, and it's just a rabbit chase that never seems to end. But one of my favorite stories of curses that I think has some validity to it is the curse of Robert the Doll down in Key West, Florida. And many say that was the inspiration for the movie Chucky and Child's Play. And it's a 100-year-old doll that is thought to be cursed for anybody who comes in contact with it and does not ask permission to take its photo or do other things. If you go to the museum where it's housed, several walls are filled with letters from people claiming that when they went to visit Robert, they were rude or they didn't ask permission, and then bad luck seem to approach them afterwards. And, you have hundreds of these people that are claiming to have something happen bad while they were visiting Robert the Doll. And it was funny, just a couple years back, I was in Florida doing a program on TV with a company doing a documentary on Robert the Doll. And the news crew had just visited Robert the day before, and they were all kind of skeptics and, just filmmakers. They didn't believe in the paranormal. And I was meeting them in Florida at this location down by a swamp to give it good atmosphere. And right before I got there, they were in their rental car backing it up, and they smashed it into a tree and broke out the huge back window. And they all started laughing when I got there, saying that the curse of Robert had finally followed them. And I love stories like that, where it's maybe just nothing more than a coincidence, but we attach some meaning to it that we normally wouldn't have.
Yeah, it just makes life more fun, to have a little bit of a sense of humor with those kind of things. And it does beg the question, the psychological question, is it because you heard the story and then the seed was planted and then they manifested some bad luck subconsciously? Does it have to do with synchronicities? I think there's a weird subconscious thought field or matrix that people can tap into, and sometimes maybe these things that are considered paranormal involve that realm, that sector of the universe that we haven't yet defined in modern science.
I agree with that completely, and I think it's all about perspective. I visited a place called the Black Angel of Death in Iowa City, Iowa, in a cemetery, this Black Angel gravestone that is said to curse people and kill people and everything you can think of terrible. And I'd been there half a dozen times, never without any ill effects to me. And the last time I was there, the very next day after leaving the Black Angel, I received a speeding ticket, my first one in 20-some years. And again, was that just coincidence, or, was it something related to the statue? And that's part of the fun, is making up your own mind.
Yeah, man, weird stuff. And I'm always tempted to provoke something that's said to be cursed or haunted for the sake of validating it, but it seems to be just a lose-lose. Either nothing happens and I lose a little piece of that magic in my life, or I get the proof I'm looking for and the curse ruins my life. So maybe I'll just pass on those temptations.
Yeah, a lot of people actually, that's a new trend in the legend tripping field of calling out these dares and doing them with the idea that something bad will happen. And I have so many people who tell me they want to, sit on this cursed mausoleum in Wisconsin that you'll be shoved to the ground by the angry spirits. And they go out seeking to do these things, or they want to go down to Collinsville, Illinois, to the gates of hell, where it is said if you pass through all 7 of the bridges in one night, the gates will open up. And people actually want to try these things to do them, but maybe you're in a better perspective there of it's a lose-lose either way.
Yeah, I want to see someone else do it, but I'd like to take a comfortably safe seat off on the sidelines. But man, you've also looked a lot into cryptozoology creatures, which the listeners know is a guilty pleasure of mine, but one on your list that I hadn't heard of was the Tataduni in Belize. I Googled it, and it seems to be some type of gnome or leprechaun type of thing. What's the story with those little guys?
Yeah, the Tata Duende in Central and South America, the variations change. Some talk of it as like a gnome or a leprechaun or a trickster, whereas others that I spoke with said that it was more of a jungle protector of their resources over there. And the majority of sightings come with this creature being, a diminutive creature, 3.5 to 4 feet tall, wearing a sombrero, walking through the forest. And it seems to have supernatural powers, which we would put, in the same category like the gnomes or the fairies, leprechauns, little people, the hurdle folk, all of those. Where I spoke with one gentleman who was working in what we would consider a natural forest here in the U.S., down by the Blue Hole Forest in Belize. And when we asked if he had ever heard of the Duende sightings, his face got white, and he told us the story when he was a kid, that he was out playing and he saw this small man appear at the edge of the woods, and the man was singing and playing a song, and the young boy fell into this spell and started walking toward the man. And then all of a sudden he heard his mother yelling for him to come back home for lunch or dinner. And the spell was broken, and he ran back fearful of what would have happened. And he looked at us and said, "Why would you ever go looking for this creature? You want to stay as far away from this thing as possible." So I think I love these stories in other countries because it shows just the extent of their belief system, that they believe in these creatures wholeheartedly, that it's not something to trifle with, that it's something that you should really heed the warning of.
Yeah, man. When cultures around the planet have similar stories of type legends or leprechauns or gnomes or these little guys, it just makes it all the more interesting. It adds another layer of validity to it, possibly. I mean, and even in these more remote areas, it's even more intriguing. And I've had guests talk about these massive cavernous worlds that beneath the Earth's crust is got these massive cavern systems that contain probably all types of life that we just don't even talk about or know about. And maybe that's where Bigfoots truly reside. And then they just, every once in a while, one comes out and wanders around the town for a bit and goes back. I wonder if it's not the same with some of these leprechaun type little guys. They could just be beings from these cavernous worlds. They got to live somewhere less obvious, you know?
And that would explain one of the skeptics' main criticisms of cryptozoology, of why haven't we found the carcass of a Bigfoot or any type of evidence of little people or any of the other, anything from the beast of the Bray Road to chupacabras. Why haven't we found these? Well, that may be one explanation, is that they don't actually reside here.
I've also heard people on the other side give the argument, you see pigeons all over the city, but have you ever really seen a baby pigeon? Because I haven't. I've seen thousands of adult ones. Or, if you're out in the woods, have you ever seen a bear carcass? You never seen a Bigfoot carcass. Have you ever even seen a bear one? Because generally you don't. You may see a live one, but they're way more abundant than, say, a Bigfoot. So some of these questions of like, well, why don't we have the smoking gun evidence? I'm like, well, there's a lot of things that we consider normal and everyday reality, but if you try to get it in a certain framework, you can't find it. So I don't know. Sometimes I think people are a little too hard up for that smoking gun evidence, because that doesn't necessarily mean, just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it isn't there.
I agree completely. Here in the Midwest, in the Northwoods of Wisconsin and Minnesota, we have a ton of bear, wolves, and moose. And I've been in the woods countless hours on end over the years, and I've yet to encounter a carcass of any of those animals. And we know there are hundreds upon hundreds of those creatures living. That what if we're talking about creatures of just a couple or even one or two, that the odds of finding them, as you said, might be very minuscule.
Man, wouldn't it be interesting if Bigfoots and leprechauns and fairies actually resided in these cavernous worlds in the inside of the earth, and they had stories and myths and lore about a bright land with a blue sky and towering buildings and legends of the weird human creatures that all love to kill each other and exchange green paper? Wouldn't that be trippy?
Yeah, no one would believe them down there. They'd say that's just too weird.
Right, yeah, and then every one of them in your field ventures to the surface to try to get some pictures of the surface world and escape back down without being captured.
I think you just wrote a movie right there.
Yeah, man, it might be the other side of the coin. Who knows? The world is a weird place. But we were talking a little bit about the Van Meter visitor through our email exchange, which I know you've got a book about, and was a Batman, Mothman type of winged creature that showed up in Iowa for a while. But knowing I love a good conspiracy, you mentioned that there were some things going on around those sightings that may have alluded to a cover-up or something similar. Can you tell me more about that angle?
Yeah, well, of course, in 1903, we're looking at rural Iowa, small town of Van Meter, 800 people, when the town started seeing mysterious balls of light that would be very similar to UFO sightings today. And eventually it turned into people seeing and shooting at this 8-foot giant bat-like creature that they thought was coming out of an old abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. So they started talking about this thing as being an antediluvian monster from biblical times. And what I found fascinating is that the newspaper accounts talk about them cornering this beast at the old mine, and then they stopped reporting about it. They didn't know more news articles whatsoever. It just abruptly stopped. And we had no idea whether these people were, they killed it or they were harmed by it or what happened. And then it seemed like the town did everything they could to distance themselves from this story once it broke, that they wrote editorials in newspapers saying, do not come here, there's nothing to see, which of course, even at that time had the reverse effect of people wanting to go there. But it seemed as though it was nearly just kind of forgotten, and they tried to brush it over. In 1903, they tried to cover it up, if you will, and it remained hidden for many decades. Even locals, townsfolk in Van Meter didn't really know the story until we happened to start digging a little bit deeper. And it really seemed like there was some type of conspiracy back then to make sure more information about the case never got out.
That is interesting. And again, a coal mine, this beast coming from a coal mine. That's these cavernous worlds in the inner earth. Could be. And maybe the higher ups found out about the situation, came to town, put the kibosh on this thing, didn't want people asking questions or digging deeper or getting wise to the idea that there might be otherworldly entities beneath our feet. But yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good anecdotal story.
And the creature itself seemed to be about 100 years in front of UFO research, because it was exhibiting things that we now see in UFO literature and research, but back then they had never heard of. This thing was impervious to weapons. It had a light that was protruding out of a horn in its head, and this light was shining at a brightness that nearly blinded people, and it had the ability to release some type of odor which erased the memory of certain witnesses that they remembered up until seeing this light hit them with an odor, and then they forgot the rest of the evening. I mean, all things of missing time, technology way above our own, things that we now consider staples of UFO abduction research, but back then they had never heard of.
Wow. That's interesting too. Man, amnesia by smelling an odor. I have never heard of that involved with a cryptid yet. So that's pretty unique.
Yeah, that was one of the aspects I loved of the case, is that this thing could just erase the memory of people. And I wonder how many people were hit by this thing. The newspapers only talk about one person that was hit, but it may have been dozens or hundreds for all we know.
Yeah. Weird stuff, man. Also, we got to take some time out for Pepie before we go. Pepie, the Lake Monster of the Mississippi, is actually your latest book, and you were kind enough to share it with me, and I thought it was great. What I really liked about it, as opposed to many other cryptid books that I've read, is that it's got all the previous sightings that you'd expect, but it's also more of a tour diary from the 2 expeditions you've gone out on searching for Pepie, and a taste of that $50,000 reward offered up by this Minnesota businessman. And I have to say, man, it seems like you got a lot of good, compelling pictures of wood.
Yeah, wood, lateral waves, half-submerged logs. What I love about this is that there is a $50,000 reward offered for anyone who can capture proof that Pepie is either an undiscovered species or a species that is thought to be extinct. And as of today, that reward hasn't been claimed, so any of your listeners can make their way up to the Mississippi River and visit Lake Pepin and capture this thing. But when I do books, a lot of the time I want to get the general public. It's not necessarily aimed for the die-hard researchers. And those are the people that would love for you to say, spend 20 pages talking about how you discovered one sighting took place 3 days before everybody else actually thought it took place. But for the general public, they want the highlights and the fun. And we really stole some of Nick Redfern's 3 Men Seeking Monsters approach, and that we decided to document our 2 expeditions in kind of a paranormal travel log, much like he did with his book, we thought that that's going to be a lot of fun for people who may never visit the lake. At least they can ride around on our expedition cruiser and get a feel for it.
Yeah, man, it is a good way to write a book. And unfortunately, you didn't find the creature, but I did think it was a little bit funny that the newspaper that did apparently have a picture of the creature from years prior was so difficult to work with for you.
Yeah, talk about conspiracies. I contacted a paper that posted back in 1987 a picture of the alleged Pepie, claiming it was conclusive evidence of the creature's existence. And they all but, threatened to burn down my house that if I talked to them again. They wanted nothing to do with the story. The main desk operator told me that the editor wasn't available and they wanted nothing to do. It was almost as though they were afraid that somebody was going to sue them or something. I had never in my entire research career encountered a newspaper that was so willing to just throw out everything they had done and just cover it up.
Yeah, it definitely adds a little mystique to the story. Any plans for a third expedition, or has Pepie worn you out with just the two?
No, I would love to go back. And a lot of people say you must have been disappointed when you haven't solved the mystery. But for me, it's the exact opposite. That if I would have determined that it was nothing more than a large sturgeon or a catfish or something like that, for me, that would have been just terrible, that the mystery would have been, dead forever, that I hope generations from now, kids stick their feet into Lake Pepin and wonder if Pepie's going to chomp them off.
Man, awesome stuff. Is there anything else in your 20 years of research, any mysteries or stories that stick out to you as being interesting that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I love the Wendigo stories. Of course, I'm from the North Woods of Wisconsin, and Minnesota and Canada have the story of this, the supernatural being that is thought to have been someone that fell into a hard winter and resorted to cannibalism and then's forever cursed to walk the earth as this Wendigo creature. And many believe that, much like hearing the Irish banshee, that it's a harbinger of death, that if you see this creature, it means you or someone that is going to die very shortly. So I love stories like that where there's some danger involved.
Right on. Yeah, that's kind of new to me also, but I think that's a compelling legend. Man, very cool, Chad. It has been a crazy, all over the map plethora of paranormal weirdness, just the way I like it, and I'm sure you do too. But before we really call it in, would you like to tell the people a little bit about your website or books or anything else you got going on?
Sure. Best way to find me is unexplainedresearch.com, or just type my name in. You'll be flooded with more stuff than you ever want or need. But, my main goal here is to not take my word for any of this. Go out on your own adventure and, discover what's in your own backyard. And I think of a lot of your listeners will find that there's some creepiness waiting out there for them.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, man. It is everywhere, just beyond the humdrum 9-to-5 life that we're all so tuned into. But hey, man, it's been awesome. Great time. Keep doing what you do. Good luck finding the answers to some of these strange mysteries, and take care of yourself out there.
Hey, thanks, and keep an eye out.
Will do, man. Take care. There we have it, folks. Another one in the bag. If you have any stories of paranormal weirdness in your life, please go to thehighersidechats.com and click on the microphone on the side and leave us a message. I love playing those on the air and the submitted music, so go ahead and write something about THC or the conspiracy and fringe topics we cover, and I would love to play it, as long as it's a good quality recording. That is important. But big thanks to Chad Lewis today. I had a blast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy all of them. Hell, I'll go one step further and say I hope you enjoy life itself. It's tough, though. There's a ton of bullshit to sift through and tough lessons to learn on the journey of finding your path, why you showed up here. So let me end this with a few positive ideas for you, because sometimes you just need to hear it. But think ahead for a second. Call in to work tomorrow. Tell your boss you're sick. You've been working too damn hard, and take a day to work on your passion project. And if you don't have one yet, god damn it, meditate and listen to Alan Watts and Manly P. Hall lectures until you find that passion. And work for yourself for 8 hours tomorrow. Do what you're going to do to get to that happy place in life in a more sustainable way, like I'm trying to do. If you're someone who felt like I did, like you're just kind of spinning your wheels, Everyone says work hard. I say don't work hard for anyone but yourself, because no one's going to pay you what you're worth. And you didn't manifest on this planet to work at CVS or to file reports for telecom or answer phones at AT&T. I think you had bigger plans when you came here. Or take the advice of today's Money Bomb winner, Brittany, buying something for her partner to keep the creative passion alive for him. God damn it, that's someone who's thinking on a higher level. Does your partner do that for you? A better question really is, do you do that for your partner? Who knows? It's easy to get stuck in the 9-to-5 rut and stuck in the pattern of go to work, watch TV with the lover, and start again tomorrow. But maybe today, bring something home for your partner that supports their creative side. Do they like photography? Do they want to get into learning another language? Do they want to garden? Do they want to be in music? Do they want to write? Do they want to paint? Hopefully they have something that's keeping them going. Bring home something for your partner that supports their creative side or gives them a new tool of expression, and help each other love life. Not just live through it, but really love it. Go on a goddamn ghost hunt or something, or give them a gift that never stops giving. The Higher Side Chats Plus. Only one more episode to go, and then on August 1st, we start the new 2-hour extended show. Man, I really had to cheapen that with my bullshit, didn't I? Well, I have to say, I hope that over the years you've gotten a sense of my character enough to trust me when I say that I have waited to the last second to implement this new Plus show. So I really do need it to be successful, like, right away. So I'm doing my best to make it valuable. I've recorded the first 2 shows already, and holy shit, guys, I think they are both pretty damn good. And I have to express this thoroughly. My life is in your hands. My life is in your hands, dudes. I've done my part this week, people. Keep fighting the good fight. Your move, Tulpas. Your fucking move.
And they said you'll feel better in the morning, take some of this. And now I can't feel a thing. I dreamt I was in addict and I woke up in a panic, dying to get back to sleep. In the waking world I wander around, just wondering where to go. In my dreams I'm running right into your door. I got a little headache, watch it today be any different. It just screams, go home, go home, go home. So I tried to find the subway, and then someone tripped and unplugged me. Now silent and still I lay here until she comes and turns me on. Out here I'm a mess, I'm a ghost who overslept on Halloween. I've been stood up twice and she seems so nice, I think her name was Destiny. So let me in, I don't wanna leave her ever again. It's an ugly world where beautiful doesn't mean much of anything. Let me in. In the waking world I wander around, just wondering where to go. In my dreams I'm running right into your door. So let me in, I don't wanna leave her ever again. It's an ugly world where beautiful doesn't mean much of anything. Let me in. Let me
Okay, what are we doing today?
Yeah, I say, give me some that says I get up every morning at 5:30 and commute for an hour and a half to some bullshit job, or my jag-off boss expects me to kiss his balls all day just so I can afford to keep my ungrateful screaming kids decked out and Dora the Explorer shit and my wife up to her fat ass in self-help videos until the day I get up the courage to put a shotgun in my mouth. Right here. Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Every day I'm hustling, 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 hustling.